Hi, it's Adrian Walsh here from EcoStream Water Management. We're on part 2 of our backflow prevention series, which is about the hazard ratings for backflow prevention devices. A lot of people get confused about when to use different devices and what type of device to use in what situation. So let's be really irrigation specific at the moment and just look at the different devices that we could use in different scenarios. I've got most of them here today. Some of our team took out one of them, wanted to show today, but that doesn't matter. I can kind of show you what needs to happen anyway. First things first, I want to just point out what a backflow prevention device isn't. Now, this here is a one-way swing check valve, and I might better hold it up. You can see through there at the moment, so I dropped the little gate there. Now, you might use something like that in a pump situation or where you're trying to stop water flowing backwards. But that doesn't meet the requirements for backflow prevention. Sure, does it stop water flowing back through the pipe? Yes, but it doesn't meet our requirements by law to install a backflow prevention device. So keep something like that for pumps or things. Same with this type of valve. That valve there, that's one way. That's a spring check valve. And quite often you might use that in a situation where you'd have that little screen on the bottom. And you might use that at the bottom of a dam or a tank or something like that, and you'd use that for a suction line. That's one way. Once again, water won't flow back through it, but it doesn't meet the requirements for backflow prevention. So let's start off for a low hazard situation. In nearly all situations where you're going to hook to a mains water supply in a domestic irrigation system, you're going to need to put in a low hazard backflow prevention device. This meets the requirements most of the time. There's some situations you don't need one, yet they're so inexpensive that I'd put one in anyway, just to make sure you're okay. If you look at the plumbing rigs, you'll find exactly what situation you use that in, but I'd say in like 90% of domestic or residential scenarios where you're putting irrigation in, that will tick the box for you. And so what it is, they call it an untestable dual check valve. So there's nothing on it to test it out, but there's just two little one-way valves in there. If you undid that, they'd fall out. Let's see if I can do it by hand. No, it won't let me. There's a point of disconnection on it, so if you had an isolation valve on it, you'd be able to remove it. But that will meet your requirement for low hazard. Now, my medium hazard device got taken away today. It looks very similar to this one, which is the high hazard device. Once again, it's one directional. The main difference you'd notice on a medium hazard is, and we call it a testable double check valve device, and this is where it can get confusing, because that there is a dual check valve, and quite often we've asked for a dual check valve and we get sent a double check valve. So let's just pretend that we don't have this vent at the bottom, which pretty much makes that the high hazard device. So let's pretend that's missing. And that would be your testable double check valve, which meets the standards for a medium hazard situation. Where would we hit a medium hazard situation? Well, in irrigation, where once again we're hooking to a mains water supply somewhere, if it's classed as being commercial, and I'd class that as things like schools or factories or things like that, but it's a pretty standard install. We're not doing anything crazy like injecting chemicals or cross-connecting pipes or anything like that. And we're not using alternate water supplies. We're just watering, an oval, and we've connected it into the mains water supply, and we've just got sprinklers running. That is when you'd need a medium hazard backflow prevention device. Now, lastly, and you know what? What you need to know is there's a bunch of ways of meeting these requirements. I'm just talking about the most common. So the last one is a high hazard situation. So where would you have a high hazard situation? All right, you'd have it where you've got alternate water supplies coming into a premises. So let's say another scenario would be is if you're on a commercial application and you have to interconnect the tank water with the mains water. That's a situation to protect the mains water. You'd put in an RPZ, reduced pressure zone backflow device. It's got that little vent at the bottom. It'll dump the water if it needs to be dumped out to really protect that main line. Another situation you might use it in is, and that's quite common, is, mind you, it hasn't been out for a little while, or we haven't used it for a while because there's some alternatives at the moment. For a long time, drip line with a Treflan chemical in it to stop root intrusion into drip line. As soon as you have a chemical in a line, that would be classed a high hazard situation, and that's when you'd use an RPZ. There's some other things you could do. You could also use a brake tank. Now, a brake tank would be something that we'd put in if we were trying to pressure boost something, but if we used a brake tank and an air gap along with it, we could fill the top of the tank up and water would come trickling into the top of the tank, and this is the inlet, but there's this gap in between the outlet of that pipe that trickles in and the top of the tank. And there's no way that water's jumping up back into there. So that air gap or the registered air gap would meet the requirement for high hazard prevention. So RPZ, registered air gap for high hazard, double check valve, testable double check valve assembly for medium hazard, and untestable dual check valve for low hazard in domestic situations. Hopefully that helps out. Reach out if you want any help in backflow prevention. If you go to www.ecostreamwater.com.au, you'll be able to contact us through there, through our Facebook, through LinkedIn, through blogs, through podcasts. We've got the irrigation podcast now, where we talk about a whole bunch of topics. So reach out somehow, one way or another. We're more than happy to help. Thanks.